It has not been the season that either the Browns or the Dolphins have expected for their respective franchises, but we are going to be previewing this AFC showcase between the Browns and the Dolphins here on a crossover Thursday on the Locked On Network.
You are Locked On NFL Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's going on, everybody, and welcome to another crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Network. I am Kyle Krabs of Locked On Dolphins, joined by Spencer Gurman of Locked On Browns, and we are previewing this Cleveland Browns Miami Dolphins Week 17 showcase of AFC teams that had high expectations and have not necessarily lived up to those expectations throughout the course of this season. This crossover Thursday is presented by PrizePicks. Download the PrizePicks app, use code LOCKEDONNFL, and win $50 instantly when you play $5. Spencer, first and foremost, welcome to the network. We talked a little bit in the pre-show. You're a new face here on Locked On, but it's exciting to have you, and excited for you to pick my brain here about the Miami Dolphins as we get this thing rolling.
Yeah, man. No, it's been fast and furious since I took over. Obviously, really excited though to be able to communicate with the Browns community, the Dog Pound, but also be part of this team. I've heard such great things about everybody, whether it's your show, Kyle, or others, and everyone always has such good things to say. So really excited to be part of this, and really looking forward to. Listen, I like you said in the intro, Browns season hasn't come the way anybody hoped. They're a 3-win team. There's definitely some apathy that's set in for fans, I think. But for the Dolphins, this game still means something. So I am looking forward to sort of talking through the X's and O's here a little bit and getting some perspective on how you think this thing could play out.
So I guess the biggest thing for Miami coming into this game is they were a team that had a big showcase against Houston a couple weeks ago, and they came in with Teron Armstead, had knee soreness and missed the game. Austin Jackson, the starting right tackle, went out with a season-ending knee injury against Buffalo in Week 9. The third tackle was Kendall Lamb, and he couldn't go against Houston with back tightness. So you were down to a second-round pick, Patrick Paul at left tackle, and a practice squad player in Jackson Carman was the starting right tackle against Houston. And the offense was just a mess. Well, they got Teron Armstead and they got Kendall Lamb back for the game this past week against San Francisco, and they put up big-time rushing numbers. I mean, they had an explosive run in that game for Devon Achane to put the game on ice. Tua Tagovailoa became just the fourth quarterback to pass for 200-plus passing yards against the 49ers all season. So when you put success on a scale of what the standard is for San Francisco, it was a good performance from the Dolphins offense. And it sounds like Miami will have both Teron Armstead and Kendall Lamb in the fray for this matchup, where obviously the big bad wolf that's looming on the other side of the line of scrimmage is perhaps the best defensive player in football, Myles Garrett. So I think that's the biggest thing for Miami coming into this game is that they have been coaching around the interior offensive line. But when you have to coach around the interior offensive line and an offensive tackle, you saw 2 weeks ago what it did to the game plan, and things completely fell off the rails. I don't think that is going to be in play for Miami as far as what they have to deal with to problem solve how to protect against Myles Garrett.
Yeah, it's interesting because week to week, I talking with just other shows or just people from other teams. It's always interesting to hear how other teams are preparing for Myles Garrett, because we know covering this team every day that he is the game wrecker. He is the guy that everyone is scheming around to try to avoid. But to hear kind of like different perspectives on it and how much teams are taking that seriously, I'll find pretty interesting. I think one thing that I've certainly noticed, and we were actually talking to players about this today with the Miami offense, has been just, I think in previous years, you saw a lot more shots down the field. I know this has probably been a topic of conversation for you guys, but this year it seems like they're relying a lot more on just like getting guys in space and sort of short passes and letting those guys go to work, your Tyreek Hills, your Jalen Waddles, your Achans. So I find that kind of interesting, because one thing that the Browns have struggled with this year has been their tackling, and there's been a lot of missed tackles this year. And so like that is a recipe for success, I think, for Miami. If they're able to make those plays work and break a lot of tackles, like it could be a long day for this Browns defense. The defense, and here's the thing, like I think Browns fans had a little bit of I don't want to say unrealistic expectations, but because they were so good last year on defense, I think everybody just assumed it was going to carry over. And I always like to say defenses are like bullpens. Like year to year, they can be so different. And I actually think in the grand scheme of things, like the defense hasn't been terrible. They've kept the Browns in a lot of games. Even last week, they kept them in the game against Cincinnati. It's just their offense has been terrible, and they can't really put up a lot of points, or they turn the ball over too much. So, yeah, like in that vein, like I that has been maybe the biggest problem I think for this Browns defense this year. Even though they, in a year where they're not as good as last year, but still pretty solid, the missed tackles has been a real issue.
Yeah, and I think for Miami, it's Jalen Waddle was a limited participant in practice on Thursday after he missed the 49ers game. He got rolled up on from behind and had a knee injury that cost him the second half against Houston and then the game against San Francisco. But the emergence of Jonnu Smith as a big guy, and that was something Mike McDaniel talked about in the offseason when they were asking about what a player like that can bring to an offense that was so explosive play oriented. He talked about when you catch, your traditional rush fours and everybody's playing too high shells and they're sitting way over the top to prevent explosive plays. Having a 240-pound guy that can run 20 miles an hour with the ball in his hands is an element that frankly, they have not had in a really long time. And in this offense, if teams are just going to spam cover two, which is what the Dolphins have been seeing, I've been seeing a lot of Tampa 2 to protect running speed at 3 up the middle of the field and play hard flats to prevent free access and kind of high-low those 2 stud receivers that they have. The carryover for that is these shallow crosses and hitches to Jonnu Smith inside of 8 yards of depth, and then he'll turn upfield and he's going to run the first guy over. And he's done it all season long en route to this past week against San Francisco, set franchise records for receptions and receiving yards in a single season by a tight end. So that amongst all the buttons that Miami's pushed that haven't worked this offseason, that individual role with Jonnu Smith has been a big-time catalyst for Miami as they get ready to catch obviously an aggressive scheme with Jim Schwartz. And I'm excited to see how they handle that just because, as you said, this defense still has a lot of ball players on it and it still has a lot of talent. And it'll be a great test for Miami to get those playmakers the ball in space and see how they handle it.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, the too high safety sort of phenomenon, revolution, if you will, that's going on. I mean, that's not the Dolphins are seeing that, but I think that's just like league wide. There's a lot of that happening. And I know Jim Schwartz had talked about that a little bit earlier in the season. But yeah, I mean, the Myles Garrett part of this is always going to be must watch, no matter who's out there trying to block him, and they'll throw everything at him, and he'll still be able to make plays because he's that good. And I am also excited to see Denzel Ward go up against Tyreek Hill and shadow him for large portions of this game as well. He's having a phenomenal year. Probably is. I've actually said I think this has been his best year as a pro. So he's been fantastic. What about real quick? I know we want to hit on the other side of the ball for Miami. Just what does that group kind of bring to the table? I can tell you there's certain things you do have to scheme for. Jerry Jeudy's having a great season. We know the run game can get going at times, but this offense is pretty anemic. And so I think this is actually an opportunity for Miami to maybe dominate this game depending on what they can do on defense.
Yeah, I think their defense metrically, it's a very mixed bag as far as from a scoring defense perspective. They're 9th in the league in scoring defense, giving up less than 22 points a game. They're respectable in yards. They're 7th in yards defensively. Now they've also played almost 100 less plays on defense than they have on offense this season. And they're averaging actually more yards per play allowed on defense than they are on offense. They're 26th in turnovers, only 13 turnovers thus far this season. But that's a group that they have standout players that help move the needle, and then they have fill-in players in most of your other spots where you have Jalen Ramsey is the star player in the secondary, and Kader Coe, who's had probably the best 2-week stretch of his career since his rookie season the past 2 weeks. But the safety play with Jordan Poyer, who's an end-stage player, and Javon Holland, who has frankly regressed in each of the last couple of seasons. He's not been the player. He's in a contract year. He talked about a lot in the summer. It feels like it's been something that's been weighing on him, and it's negatively, or whatever it is, has negatively impacted his play. So the secondary is, how do you choose to use Jalen Ramsey on any given week and implement him, and then build everything else around that with what they do structurally, whether that's more of Ramsey in the slot, whether that's Ramsey mirroring and shadowing a guy like a Jerry Jeudy. And each week it's been a little different. They've had a lot of different buttons that they've tried to push. The linebacker group is anchored by Jordan Brooks. He got banged up against San Francisco. Sounds like he's going to be good to go. But he's been a phenomenal free agent addition for the team with a lot of speed. They don't have an athletic second linebacker, whoever it is, whether it's Tyrell Dotson, whether it's Anthony Walker, who did not practice on Thursday. That second spot is if you can get a tight end or a back and get some matchups on him in the middle of the field, that's where teams have had a lot of success, is playing away from 20 on the second level. And then the defensive line, the defensive tackle group's been very strong. And it's Chop Robinson, the first-round rookie pick at pass rusher, and a bunch of nothing else is really what they're getting from the edge rush room. So we'll get into how that group matches with Cleveland when Cleveland has the ball next here on this crossover Thursday edition here on the Locked On Network. That's coming your way next. Make sure you guys stick with us. Rocket Money can save you a lot of money on subscriptions that you have forgotten about, or maybe even paying for twice. It's happened to all of us. And Rocket Money is the personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether that's subscriptions, your spending habits, or the goals that you want for the future year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon, rocketmoney.com/lockedon. So Spencer, that you kind of got the rundown on the Dolphins as a group. I wanted to ask you, I know the offensive line has been a group for Cleveland this year that, it's been the anchor of success offensively for this team in the past couple of years when they've won double-digit games. And I know they've been really banged up, and that interior group's getting a little older. What has been the biggest common consensus theme in your mind with that offensive line group, and how do you think it may be able to match against a group that has some strong guys on the interior, but some limited options as far as who they can throw on you at the edge?
Yeah, so the offensive line, honestly, it kind of opens up like this loaded question in terms of just like there's so many different angles here, because you're right, like the last couple of years, that has been the strength of this team. You can look up previous like preseason offensive line rankings, postseason offensive line rankings, and the Browns generally always in the top 10 because they had such a strong group. Now, I think the biggest common denominator and why they've regressed this year, I think I underestimated this at the start of the season, was losing Bill Callahan. Like, we all know how great he is, the reputation that he has around this league. And I think I figured it would have an impact. I didn't think it would be so bad, though, that this offensive line would look like they almost don't belong. Like some of these guys, like we have questions about all of them, like that the group might just look completely different next year for the most part, aside from maybe one or two guys. Like, we have so many questions about how bad this group has been. And so, yeah, like I think I underestimated that. I also think like some of this is, offensive lines, they age. They sometimes don't, the guys aren't always playing as effective year to year. It can just kind of be different. And one of the biggest holes they've had has been at left tackle, where their first round pick in 2020, Andrew Berry's first round pick, was Jedrick Wills. And he's obviously out now, but he's been a big just kind of, question mark since he entered the league. There's been a lot of questions about like his desire, his want to play, and they're pretty much set up for them to not bring him back after he's playing on the 5th-year option this year. So probably not going to be back with the Browns next year. And they're sort of looking for some answers at that position specifically. And then, I think injuries are the other part of it. You kind of alluded to that. Like, they have a lot of guys banged up. Wyatt Teller was out for a period of time. Jack Conklin got a late start to the season coming back from his knee injury from last year. Pretty much the only offensive linemen that have stayed healthy pretty much the whole season. The only one that stayed healthy the whole season really has been Joe Bitonio. And there's questions about his future because he very well might retire after the next 2 weeks here. So, like that has been one of the more interesting parts of this team, because that was always something you could depend on, and it's not there this year. And it's something they're going to have to address in the offseason. I also think it's been interesting. Like, Joe Bitonio has talked a lot about this. This offense was built so much around like Deshaun and the passing game and throwing the ball a lot more. And he's brought up multiple times that now when they went to Jameis Winston, it was more like play action, like hand the ball off every now and then and try to work in the run game a little bit more. They were so used to just pass blocking more, not really run blocking, that it took a while for the run game to kind of get going. And now the last 2 weeks, they put up 100 yards rushing in back-to-back weeks. So like, it seems like they're getting some momentum now, but because they weren't run blocking so much, I think that kind of hindered their ability to do it when they tried to sort of pivot to some of those things. So yeah, that group as a whole is a one big question mark, I think, just in terms of the future and in terms of what went wrong this season. There's a lot of different kind of levels to it.
Well, you mentioned the quarterback position. I do want to grill you on that, but I want to put you onto some of the skill players first. You mentioned Jerry Jeudy and the season that he's had as the breakout player. But I'm curious about a player that flashed a lot when we last saw him on the field in Cedric Tillman. And I wanted to ask you about David Njoku, who I know is banged up, as far as where are each one of those guys at respectively, as far as for Cedric Tillman, a return to the field potentially. And then for Njoku, what's the vibe on how serious that injury is getting ready for this game?
Yeah, so Cedric is interesting because like he's been, I mean, we're going on I think 5 weeks now. They all kind of blur together. But yeah, like he got injured in that Thursday night game against the Steelers, which was like the game the week before Thanksgiving. Like it was almost a month or over a month ago now that he suffered that concussion, and he's still not back to the protocol. I understand it takes guys, certain guys longer amounts of time and different things. So it might just be that he hasn't cleared. But yeah, it's been kind of weird that it's taken this long for him to return. And so I mean, at this point, like my best guess is that he probably won't go just because he hasn't cleared it yet, but he is out there practicing. But he could very well like finally pass it. The concussion protocol is such like a fluky thing to really predict. So I don't know. The David Njoku, I think my heart is kind of telling me he probably won't play this weekend just because 2 days in a row where he was a DNP. Yeah, he could always play Friday or practice on Friday and be good to go, even if it's a limited capacity. But he's been dealing with a number of injuries this season, and they may even opt to just kind of like hold him out as a precaution if he thinks he could potentially go. We'll see. But yeah, he adds such an element to this offense generally because he can catch those screen passes. In the same way you were talking about Johnny Smith kind of being that weapon for the Dolphins, David Njoku gives this offense that. And so it could be Dorian Thompson-Robinson going to battle with pretty much just Jerry Jeudy and Elijah Morris is his two best options.
So I wanted to ask you about that quarterback position. I know Jameis Winston's a little banged up. I think it's a throwing shoulder injury for him.
Yeah.
Was that the only decision in making the change at quarterback, or is there kind of an evaluation period here where obviously you have the contract commitments with Deshaun Watson? We'll see what his recovery looks like from the Achilles that he suffered, but Jameis Winston, I believe, is an expiring contract for them. Yeah, so that you got a choice potentially at backup quarterback. And there's some financial restrictions, I would imagine, when the starting quarterback has the kind of contract that Deshaun does. So what were all of the elements that went into the quarterback change? And then what's your general perception on DTR in his second season?
Yeah, so I honestly think that the injury sort of popped up after the change was made. So okay. I can tell you, like, I don't want to say we were caught off guard by it, but we all kind of saw this coming after he had the bad game in Pittsburgh where he threw the 2 interceptions, and we were like, okay. And you could tell immediately because the week before, Kevin Stefanski was asked about, are you sticking with Jameis at quarterback? And he was quick to say, yeah, he's still our quarterback. And after the Steelers game a couple weeks back, that was not the answer he gave. He basically was like, I'm not ready to make any decisions. We'll talk about it, or we'll make a decision later in the week. Which, as listen to press conferences, I'm sure as much as you do, Kyle. Like when a coach pivots from like a general same answer he gives, that he's contemplating something. So we all kind of assumed this was what was going to happen. It's interesting because there was a growing, I think, contingent of the fan base that felt Jameis could come back next year, maybe even start for this team next year in kind of an open competition situation with Deshaun Watson. And the more and more he turned it over, it was like, yeah, like, what you're getting in Jameis, and it's fun right now in a 3-12 season where the games don't really have any significance to you to like see him gunslinging it around and whatever. And yeah, like the games are fun even though you lose. But when the games are of consequence again, and you start a new season, that's not going to cut it for fans. Like, they're going to be upset when they lose a game because he throws 2 pick sixes. So I ultimately think this change was just they felt like they had sort of seen what they needed to see with Jameis. Not that they didn't know who he was already, but I think like this kind of confirmed, yeah, we know what he's going to give us. Like, let's at least see what DTR kind of has in the tank in his second year. But I also think what's interesting is, like, last week, I think DTR sort of confirmed what we knew about him. Like, he's not a franchise quarterback in this league. He's maybe a veteran sort of backup type player, like a journeyman type backup player in this league. And so I think what we saw last week kind of confirms that. And I'm assuming we get a similar performance this week where you kind of just see more of the same from him. And yeah, like I don't know how much of an evaluation there really is going on, because I think the Browns also knew this about these players, but it is kind of an interesting wrinkle here to close out the season that they're just basically evaluating everybody at that position to figure out where they're going in the offseason.
Well, you mentioned
that was a long-winded answer, but there's a lot to unpack there. When you bring up Browns quarterback, it's like there's so much there. But
yeah, it's certainly not. It's funny the different forks in the road where, Miami was so attached to Deshaun Watson with all of the trade buildup for Houston, and what Tua Tagovailoa played like with Brian Flores as a coach that didn't want him, and it was a part of that tumultuous Jacoby Brissett get putting in the lineup for him. So
right.
I think there's a lot of kindred spirits between Dolphins fans and Browns fans as far as some of the tortuous quarterback experiences as of late.
I mean, I'll tell you, like, you think back to, again, the Dolphins being in the mix, and there was I remember the reports, like there was reports that there was like a trade being finalized and it was going to go through. And then there was some behind the scenes stuff that apparently didn't happen, that I think that Deshaun wouldn't really agree to, that ended up not letting that trade go through. And then the next year, even when the Browns got him, like, they were out of the mix completely. He was going to either Atlanta or Carolina. And then they come back to the table with the $230 million guaranteed, and he's a Cleveland Brown. Like, there's so many moments along the way where he wouldn't have ended up here, and this branch reality of how things go for the Browns looks completely different. It would have been interesting to see. But yeah, like, now he's the Browns' problem, and it's not an easy problem to get out of, because, again, the nature of the contract almost guarantees that he's going to be on this team next year in some capacity. It's just about whether or not they're going to pay him just to, like, not be there, or if he's competing for the job, or what. But I don't think they're just trotting him back out there as the starter next year, which, again, goes back to why I think they're evaluating everybody right now.
Well, we'll get into some keys to victory for this game and what it has to look like for DTR and the Browns offense, and Tua Tagovailoa and the Dolphins offense to put enough points up on the board. And that gives us a perfect transition to segue into our friends over at FanDuel, where there's an interesting number attached to this game over on the FanDuel Sportsbook. So we're going to get keys to victory next. Make sure you guys stick with us. You can make the most of the last couple of weeks of the NFL regular season here with FanDuel. It's not too late to get on the regular season action with America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. FanDuel has so many different ways for you to pick up the dub. It's a shame Jameis isn't starting, or else I'd have dropped the E to W reference there, and we could have got a good laugh about that. I love betting on which players are going to score touchdowns. I like the spreads. I like playing the spreads, but FanDuel has a lot of different ways for you to bet on the game, including the individual game totals for each team, the team total for the game as a whole. And that's what I think is the most interesting number about this. The game total just continues to drop in this game. It is down to 39.5 is the over-under for the game total of points. I believe it started at 42 or 43, and it has just continued to trickle downward. So if you don't think there's going to be a lot of points in this football game, 39.5 is still on the board for you. The Dolphins favored by 6.5 points. Visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Okay, Spencer, I know there's a lot of to do about the Dolphins in cold weather. And it sounds like we're going to have a decently mild game with a 4:00 kick. This game obviously got flexed out of Sunday Night Football, but it sounds like there might be a little bit of precipitation Is that something that I don't know how close your nose is to the forecast as far as side-eyeing it or anything like that?
Last I saw, and it is Christmas week, so I have been kind of checked out on these things. But last I looked, it was, I think, like 50-ish degrees and going to rain on Sunday. Yes. So, and we were just in the locker room the day we recorded this, and we were asking players about that because there is obviously this reputation that the Dolphins can't play in cold weather, and so players are kind of answering whether or not they thought that would have helped their cause and been sort of a home field advantage for them. And they downplayed it, of course. Like somebody mentioned, well, they played in Green Bay early this year, so they're used to it. But yeah, if the Browns had any hope, or if fans had any hope that was going to help the Dolphins maybe put together a bad game, it doesn't look like that's going to be in the cards. Although maybe the rain limits the passing game a little bit. We'll see.
Yeah, the Tua Tagovailoa was asked on Thursday about the last time he played in a colder environment in the rain, and it was week 17 in 2021, I think, was the last time they played against the Titans. And Tua said, the first thing I remember about that game is I did not play well and we lost. So these opportunities are fairly limited for Miami. So I think the rain is an interesting element to watch, where the team is coming off of a successful performance on the ground against San Francisco, but they had not run the ball well for 2 months prior to that. I mean, we're talking rushing yardages in the 40s and 50s per game. So if the rain becomes heavy at any stretch throughout the game, that is an element there that I think is just an extra storyline to watch. But I, for one, am thankful that we will not have a recreation of that Thursday game with Pittsburgh and Cleveland from earlier this year, because narratives are narratives for a reason, and I have no doubt that would not have been a fun experience for the Dolphins to play.
Yeah, that whole thing's funny because we're obviously going through, I don't know how well other fan bases are aware of this, but the Browns are right now going through a whole new stadium situation where the owners are funding this new project closer to their team facility, which isn't in downtown. It's a whole thing. We don't have to get into the minutia of that, but after that game, there was this new, like, this chorus of people that had been, the ones claiming like, oh, we need an open air stadium because the new stadium is going to be a dome. They all came back out of the woodwork. They were like, oh, see, this is why we keep it in. We have an open air stadium because we can get games like this. And it was not just neglecting the fact that those happen like once every, 10 years that you get a game like that. So it's not like it's really that big of a factor. And then a couple weeks later, there was actually, I guess was it the Chiefs game? I guess. Yeah, I think it was the Chiefs game 2 weeks ago. It was like a rainy day and there was like nobody in the stands. And it was like, so this is the weather. This is the weather that you're forgetting about. Like most days you get this, you don't get the cool snowstorm where the Browns win, and the nostalgia of it all isn't there. So this is why you want to know.
Well, let's get into a couple keys to victory. I'd love to hear from your perspective. What does a win for the Browns look like on Sunday?
Yeah, I do think that the tackling has to be, front of mind, because the Dolphins, I think this offense is known. Tyreek Hill's Tyreek Hill. He can show the top every now and then. And there were some guys talking about that in the locker room this week already. But like the way that this team plays, like we talked about, the shorter passes, trying to get guys in space to kind of like run and be able to make plays. You got to have sound tackling in this game on defense. And that's kind of like the biggest point that I'm looking at on the defensive side, is like just limiting what this offense with all their amazing skill players are able to do. The rest of it for me comes down to what the offense is going to do and how effective they're actually going to be. Because last week there was moments in the second half where they can move the ball, but they went after their first drive where a 66-yard run got them down to the 10, and then they got to the goal line and fumbled, and then the Bengals go down 99 yards and score. After that first drive, the Browns went 3 and out their next like 3 drives, and then had like a 5-play, 15-yard drive and punted after that one as well. Like, this offense with Dorian Thompson-Robinson is going to have to find ways to put up points. They're going to have to do better in terms of moving the football up and down the field. And on a sloppy day, like we alluded to, that could be a little bit harder. And I honestly do think like they got to find a way to get this run game going. They had the big explosive play last week with Jerome Ford, but they got to have like more consistent, I think, running game, because I think that gets Dorian Thompson-Robinson a little bit more comfortable. And he is part of that because he is a mobile quarterback. Like, he can do some things with his legs. But if they can get this run game going, especially in sloppy weather, they can get DTR a little bit more comfortable back there, then I think that sets them up to make some of the necessary plays in the passing game. And they got to be able to get Jerry Jeudy the ball. He had 3 targets last week. That's a problem. And if you're going to be missing David Njoku and potentially Cedric Tillman as well, you got to get the ball to the playmakers that you have out there. So, I think those are kind of the big things I'm looking at in terms of trying to beat this Miami team. I know that's not going to be easy because they do have a pretty stout defense in their own right. I think they're top 8 in the league, somewhere around there. But yeah, so I don't love, based on how the offense played last week, I'm a little bit weary of this matchup just in general. But yeah, I think that's kind of what it looks like. What about from the Dolphins' perspective? What are some of the big things you have your eyes on in terms of keys to get that team to be heading home with a win?
Yeah, I think they should probably be invested in matching Jalen Ramsey with Jerry Jeudy in this game. And there's been some times in games where Garrett Wilson, who's a player who has some of the same movement skills as Jerry Jeudy, where Jerry Jeudy has this suddenness at the top of routes where he can just explode and snap out of what seems like it's a straight vertical press. Garrett Wilson tested Jalen Ramsey with a couple of those the first time the Dolphins played the Jets just a couple weeks ago, and Ramsey matched up with Wilson for much of that game. So I think it gives you the best chance when the other alternatives is Kendall Fuller, their veteran corner, who's the CB2, looks like he's going to be out for this game. So that's going to have Kader Kohu, who's been traditionally the nickel, is going to be the other outside corner. And then you're getting into a situation where do you potentially play some big nickel and have a third safety that's out there?
Yeah.
They've had a third corner and an undrafted free agent in Storm Duck, who they've really liked, who's got some big opportunities in big spots. But frankly, the last time we saw him play was against the Packers, and he played terribly and was a big part of the reason why Miami had some failures to get key stops in big moments throughout the course of that game. So I don't think they want to really play that game with Jerry Jeudy against those other alternatives. So I think that one of the fierce keys to victory is putting Jalen Ramsey on Jerry Jeudy and say, hey, if you're going to feed Jeudy the ball, we're going to have our best guy consistently on coverage against him and take our chances there and see how that plays out for us. I think winning on first down for the Dolphins on both sides of the ball is really important. The Dolphins have one of the higher run stuff rates as far as when they have the football, and it sets them behind on 2nd and 11, 2nd and 9, 2nd and 10. Those kinds of conditions going against a pass rusher like Myles Garrett, you want to mitigate as much as possible. So that may mean you come out and you spread the field, and you as long as it's the weather is going to cooperate from a throwing perspective, you go empty and you just kind of find an easy completion and set up a 2nd and 6 and kind of get yourself into a more favorable down and distance before you get back into your regular offensive script on whatever that looks like. But case in point, the Browns are 9th in third down defense percentage. It's under 35 or 36% conversion rate on third downs this year, and they're dead last in the league on offense on third downs. So the more 2nd and 10s plus and 3rd and 7s plus you can put Cleveland in situationally when they have the ball, I think is a big point of emphasis for where that team really measures metrically well right now, and trying not to feed into those with what you do on either side of the ball. So I think those are two obvious things. And for a defense that hasn't generated turnovers with any consistency this year, they have 2 turnovers in the last 4 games. To see a team coming to town that's got 12 turnovers in the last 3 games, you got to take advantage of a young player at the quarterback position to put yourself in a position to win that game. So I think those are things for Miami that maybe they're a little bit less schematically, and there's some bounce of the ball luck that's involved with some of that. But I think that's the recipe for Miami is win the early downs and play your matchups, put your best player on their best player, and then see how the rest of the game can organically play out for you.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. And I do think, the turnovers have been one of the biggest problems for this team, and along the lines of like getting DTR comfortable. He's got to be able to protect that football better. Because while they've been turnover machines on offense, they have not been turnover machines on defense, and their turnover differentials is there's a massive discrepancy there, and that's part of the reason why they are 3-12 and find themselves where they're at. So, I think that's obviously super critical, super important, and I think that third down stat is what I was alluding to, where it's like the defense hasn't been as bad as people have made it out to be this year. And yeah, like they can they can keep the Browns in games, and I could see that happening on Sunday, but can the offense do enough to, match or stay pace with a team like Miami who can put up points in a hurry at times? That's the big question.
We shall see. We hope you guys enjoyed this crossover here on the Locked On Network. It's your teams every day. We don't just say it, we live it. Kyle Krabs, Locked On Dolphins, Spencer Gurman, Locked On Browns. Make sure you check out all of our shows here on the Locked On Network and enjoy the game on Sunday.